To go. This is Slow Dive with their album Souvlaki. And in the, I got to get my notes up here. In the opening montage, you heard a clip from 40 Days, and now you're going to hear a clip from When the Sun Hits.
Shit, Matt, you picked the same two I picked for the Spotify playlist. How about that?
There you go. Look at that. That didn't even, this is the way it was. So Souvlaki comes in at number 22 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 4 in 1993, number 116 of all time. It is Souvlaki's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums.
Slow Dives.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. That's Slow Dive's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. We did cover Just for a Day, what John and I did in a bonus episode, episode 3, I think Josh said, of this season.
Yep.
That's their third highest ranked album. And Souvlaki did not make Rolling Stone's list. About making this 2 weeks in a row, guys. No Rolling Stone love for any of the albums that we're covering. And Slow Dive is ranked number 121 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. All right, so this is their second record. It was they have a total of 5. Their most recent actually was last year's, 2023's Everything Is Alive. So they had a resurgence of sorts. And Souvlaki was released on June 1st, 1993. And the genres here, dream pop, shoegaze, ambient, the holy trinity for Josh. So there you go.
Yeah.
Influences, a lot of this not surprising. Brian Eno, Galaxy 500, Sonic Youth, Talk Talk, the Cocteau Twins, The Byrds, Jesus and Mary Chain, Velvet Underground, David Bowie, Aphex Twin, Joy Division. Some of their peers include Ride, My Bloody Valentine, Catherine Wheel. I remember that band. John and I did that a single. Mazzy Star, Spiritualized. And artists that they have influenced include Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, Beach House, Dive, Deer Hunter, Tame Impala, Grizzly Bear, and Unknown Mortal Orchestra. They don't have a whole lot of charting history here, mostly in Britain. This is another British band that didn't really do a whole lot here in the States. They didn't do a whole lot in Britain either. Their highest charting album is their self-titled album, Slow Dive, which came after, I think, in 2017. So that was ranked number 50. That came in at number 50 on the Billboard on the Billboard charts. And their highest charting single was 1991's Catch the Breeze, which hit number 51 in the UK. We didn't do much of a bio on them before, but just a quick one here. They were formed in Reading, England in 1989 by childhood friends Neil Halstead and Rachel Goswell. Both of them sing and play guitar. Later on, they had guitarist Christian Seville join. He was actually the only person to answer an advert for a guitarist. The band actually wanted a female guitarist, and he wanted the job so bad that apparently he offered to wear a dress if that would make them happy. But they didn't make him do that, so he got to be a guy. And the name of the band was inspired by a song by Susie and the Banshees, which Rachel Goswell was a big fan of. She was kind of she and Christian Seville were pretty goth at that time, so that's where that name came from. And then Nick Chaplin joined later on in bass, and they went through a couple drummers, but then they finally hired Simon Scott, and he appears on this record, Souvlaki. So this is one of those bands that in their time was not considered very good by the critics. They were panned in many reviews, including for their first album, Just for a Day. They weren't very favorable. And so the band after that wasn't feeling so great about it. Neil Halstead and Rachel Goswell were also they were in a relationship, but by the time they got around to recording Souvlaki, they had split up. So this is kind of like the Fleetwood Mac Rumors thing here, where they're still in a band and they're still touring together, but they're both going through some pretty tough times, having
like
broken up from each other.
Yeah,
thing, isn't it? Because that was the Cocteau Twins.
Yes.
And 2 members of Galaxy 500 were married.
That's
each
right. I
other
forgot
while
about
the other
that.
wasn't.
Yeah.
So it seems to be a feature of the genre.
Yep. So their confidence was pretty low at this time. They presented some songs to their label. They weren't liked because I think they were trying to go for a different sound, and the label was just like, we don't like this. And oddly enough, they were so frustrated that they basically just told the band, you know what, just do whatever you like. We don't care. So it was just get away. So during the recording, they did struggle to write some songs. The manager finally just said, you know what, why don't you go out, just go stay in this cottage for a couple of weeks and write some songs, right? You need some time to yourself. So Neil Halstead goes off in the middle of nowhere to this cottage by himself for a couple of weeks. He writes a number of songs. A number of them did appear on this record. The other thing that they wanted to do was to get Brian Eno to produce the record, so they reached out to him, and Eno actually turned them down, but he did agree to spend a couple of days with Halstead to write some songs and just mess around. So he did that. Eno basically just did another weird thing where he basically took a clock off the wall and had Halstead go in a room, and he's just like, okay, play a guitar, just play something for like 10 minutes. And Halstead be like, all right. So he's just goofing around. He's like, all right, after 10 minutes, stop, now play something different. And he would do that for like a couple of hours, just like trying to get a bunch of ideas laid down. So so that was his main contribution.
I guess whatever works. It just sounds so ridiculous.
Yep. And so a couple of the songs that he worked on and are on this album, he has a co-writing credit on Sing, and he also played keyboards on the track Here She Comes. And as John mentioned in a text thread to us earlier this week, the album's title was taken from a skit by American comedy duo The Jerky Boys.
American comedy geniuses, The Jerky Boys, I think I'd say. Especially in 1993, I'd probably say that.
Yeah, well, this particular, I had to look this up because I was like, what? I don't remember souvlaki being used in the sketch.
I do.
Do you remember, John? Do you want to describe it, John?
Like Greek diner sketch,
yes.
Isn't it? Like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so they call it's a hotel.
Souvlaki, yeah, I remember, yeah.
Well, it's the hotel manager, and they call him out to ask him to perform some sexual acts on his wife, and then they learn that the manager is Greek, and then the caller goes, "My wife loves that Greek shit. She'll suck your cock like souvlaki." So so there you go. So they love that so much they put it on their on the title of their record. So
famously, Radiohead also finds inspiration for their first album from the Jerky Boys.
Great unifier, Jerky Boys.
Yeah.
Were you guys Jerky Boys listeners? Just to
yes.
for a second.
No, I was not. I remember being into them, but
their first album, if you want, is that an album,
Yeah.
like for record, whatever?
Yes.
Their first one for sure. My brother had that, and I listened to it a lot. I guess they had another one or two more after that, and then they had a movie too, didn't they?
Yes, I guess if I wanted to be cool, I could say that it was too lowbrow for me. But the hours my friends and I spent laughing our asses off with that, probably.
It was perfect timing. Yeah, it was like I was like 14, 15 when it came out. So yeah, hell yeah, I liked it. But like their debut album, the reviews of this record were not favorable, and one very, very much panned in the British press. One of the guys actually said something to the effect of super dramatic, "I'd rather drown in a tub full of porridge than listen to Souvlaki again." It's like, all right, slow down. But the band attributed that to the rise of Britpop in particular, but also the rise of like Nirvana and grunge music in the States, and that those were kind of like those were kind of the genres that crowds and labels were going towards, and this kind of like the shoegaze, dream pop kind of thing was not in vogue. And, it basically kind of, ended the band at that time. They started going to their last show at that time in '93. They were describing they were playing a venue called the Garage that I guess it could fit 700 people, and they said they struggled to get 300 there. That like one point they're just like they're watching someone sweep the floor in front of the stage, which is where the crowd should be, and the bass player's like, I guess I gotta go get a job now. It's like kind of sad that's what happened, but like many other bands and the artists that went through this as well, they weren't recognized at that time. That this album has definitely, and this band in general, has grown in esteem in the press all over, and this is widely considered one of the preeminent works in shoegaze and a very influential record for music that was to come after it. So there you go. That's history of. We're going to cover them again, so they're going to have a resurgence in a decade or two. So, John, we'll start with you. What'd you think of Souvlaki?
Oh man, this is like right up my alley, man. This was such a comforting. I had a couple days where it was just a lot going on in my life, and this album I put it on. It was with me in the morning, and it just set the tone and brought me to a place of zen, I would say, this album. And then at night, same thing. There was one night when I was winding down, I put this album on for the second listen, and it was just as good the second time I listened to it. And just there, I think you and I have mentioned this before, Matt. There's something very comforting about the hum and that mix of sort of a franticness to this, but also a very sereneness to this sound. And for being supposedly the lyrics guy of the show, I could care less what the lyrics in these songs are, and because really the vocals on this are just an extension of the music itself. And I love the fact that it alternates between a male and a female singer, because I think what it does is it gives variety to the band. And so it almost makes them feel like two bands. There's just a warmth to this sound. And this is also a significant step up from the first album we covered. I thought this was a way more consistent album. I thought it was pretty much steady, great tracks throughout. The two that you picked, Matt, for the montage, there were a lot of good ones, but I particularly thought those songs really were the best manifestation of what I talked about before. Like it's almost like I was trying to describe this band to a friend. They were like, "Who are you covering this week?" I said, "I'm covering a band called Slowdive," and he's like, "Oh, I've never heard of them. Like, what is that?" I said, "Oh, they're like a shoegaze band." He's like, "Well, what is shoegaze?" And I'm like, "Boy, how do I describe shoegaze?"
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like because you hear it and like you don't quite know what it means because it's such a bizarre term, sort of. Like, what does it mean to shoegaze? And I kind of said to him, it's like the musical equivalent of like when I used to learn. This is such a weird analogy, but it'll give you an idea how my brain works. It's like the musical analogy of like the Great Red Spot on Jupiter. That it's like all these storms and this chaos that are there, right? But also they're completely condensed in this tight package, you know, that just everything else around it is sort of quiet, and then it's sort of stormy in an area. So you can see the storm, but there's also, it feels like you're kind of removed from the storm as well. So you're viewing it, but also like processing it. And that's what and my friend looked at me like I was nuts. I'm like, no, it's also like fuzzy, you know, distorted guitars, kind of like that.
Next time, just pull out your phone and play him a little bit of a song, and that will But I mean, there's different variations of it. Like this is a different version type of it than what like My Bloody Valentine. For sure.
Is, right?
Yes.
There's not the harshness in this. This is a much more inviting song. And unlike the first album, which I thought I liked as well, but it was a little bit more inconsistent. There were some songs that I felt I would say were a little bit boring at times. There weren't songs that bored me on this album. There were songs that were there, but this is, I mean, I'll say it again. This is vibes music for me. This is music that I put on, and it has almost like a therapeutic quality for me when I listen to it. And I'm not going to steal Matt's thunder, but, you know, we've talked about this both on the show and off of it, and I know that there's a little bit of an element there. I will say I'm somewhat fascinated to see what Josh thinks of this album, because I don't know how he'll process this, because it's a little bit different than the stuff he hated, but it's also similar enough to the stuff he hated that it might still fall into.
Yeah, and he wasn't around to hear it for the other time
he wasn't around for the first Slowdive album, so I didn't know what his initial take was. So you know what, I could add more to it, and I will, but I'm gonna punt to you, Josh, because I'm pretty into, because I have a pretty good idea. I know how Matt's gonna feel about this album. So go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I'm becoming a cliche of myself.
Okay,
but I really
it didn't move you over. All right, I was wondering.
Yeah, it didn't move the needle for me, unfortunately. I did find it interesting that it is kind of splits the difference between like shoegaze and dream pop. There's definitely, I felt like there's a more, you know, concrete split between those elements in the album, and so I thought that was interesting. But ultimately, like, both of those genres are hard for me to get into. I do
have you sit out of the shoegaze albums and just let me.
Well, I did like Ride. That was kind of the highest one so far. So I don't want to give up hope yet. But this coupled with Red House Painters, boy, that was tough this week. I agree with you. I do like the fact.
Oh, did you find them very similar? Because I get why you could, but I definitely process these as two different sounds.
They don't necessarily. There are similarities in the sound, but I think just like you said, the vibe was too similar for me, and that's what turned me off.
Mistress was a shoegaze song. They did it.
Yeah. I do like the fact that they had the male and female singers splitting it up. I think I like that it added variety to the album and allowed me to at least, carried me through and mixed it up enough that kept me interested. I mean, this was the shortest album we listened to this week too, so that helps. I don't know what else to say, guys.
Do you ever put this on with headphones and in the dark, Josh, and try it that way?
Well, I always listen to the albums on headphones, but never in the dark, and never just like listening to the albums themselves. I don't try and do something that's like too like mind taxing. Like I'm not doing taxes or homework or I don't know what else. I'm trying to do something that's so I can at least devote attention to the albums.
That might be the issue, though, the fact that you're doing something. I feel like this album almost like demands you to just like be completely detached from anything else, which you might not be wanting to do or like this enough to do. Yeah,
that might have to be the experiment the next time we have one of these albums. Is I'll deviate from the normal routine and see how it
sensory
affects
deprivation chamber, Josh,
exactly.
And just the headphones.
Just souvlaki. But yeah, I think if I had to choose, I would choose dream pop over shoegaze between those genres, because I do like kind of the lighter, dreamier parts of it, of the album, than kind of either the droning or kind of the feedback nature of shoegaze or the effects driven nature of it. So I guess that was something to go on as well, but overall it was just kind of a non-starter for me on this album this week. And so I'll dedicate, next time we do a dream pop or a shoegaze album, I will not do anything else, and I'll listen to it.
We're running out of them, Josh, because
it's
about to come out of fashion. That's why this was so poorly reviewed. It doesn't really come back till like the late 2000s, like when there's the revival with like Beach House and the Ravenettes and stuff. Yeah,
and Beach House
is gonna be a long time.
Is hard for me too. Emily listened to one of their newer albums, and I was like, I can't get into this.
Well, you don't say the Beach House is hard for you with your tastes.
Prediction: even if we get to another shoegaze or dream pop album, Josh does all that, he's still not gonna like it. That's
stay away from the Ravenettes and like Real Estate and all kinds of other bands of that genre too. You're not gonna like it. Yeah.
Sorry, listeners who.
It's okay, Josh. It's okay.
Opinion.
Don't worry, Matt and I'll praise.
Yep. Yeah, I love this album. I love the sound. I love what they're doing here. I think I love the male, female, back and forth with the vocals. Mm-hmm. There's just such a pleasant feeling with this. It's just it's a sad. It's kind of like a melancholy vibe. I mean, and lyrically too, right? I mean, a lot of this is very. I mean, Halstead and Goswell, and he, Halstead's doing most of the writing, but Goswell's got a couple of contributions as well. But it's a sad record, right? And but at the same time, it's such a weird a weird juxtaposition, because it also feels uplifting too, right? Like when they build up to something, and that's one of the reasons I like a song like like When the Sun Hits, or Souvlaki Space Station's great too. It's just like this building this sound to this it's echoey, it's got all the reverb, but it's just filling the entire space with this sound that's just, I don't know, it's just it's a nice sounding.
It's like there's
aesthetic.
A storm, and then it's like that quiet and that calm after the storm where it's like relaxing. Yeah. And I just it can be both really great background music, but it can also really reward you if you're just totally doing what John's saying, to put the headphones on, close your eyes, and just let it be there. I picked 40 Days because I like the way that he's singing there. There's a really cool progression of the notes that's happening there. Kind of goes in a little bit of a different direction. I love how it ends with Dagger. It's such like that's more of a stripped down acoustic song, so it's kind of a non
shoegaze type sound. It's a bit more of just an acoustic song, but very pretty, very sad, but very pretty.
And they're
the
singing
same time.
together about like the death of their relationship, which I thought was pretty profound.
Yeah. And it's just amazing. Like, and I did watch, there is a documentary that you can see on YouTube. It's Pitchfork did it. It's kind of like a classics album thing, and it basically talks about the beginning of the band and really them through this record, essentially. And you just hear him and both guys will talk about like how difficult it was to kind of like tour together and be on the same bus together, traveling from city to city, and the other members of the band kind of being like, this is weird, what do we do, and like the other two recognizing, this kind of sucks for the band, but
it's kind of like No Doubt a little bit, Tragic Kingdom era, No Doubt.
But that's not even what broke them up. What broke them up was the fact that like they weren't really doing too well, and in fact, bringing this back to what we were talking about with Red House Painters, Goswell and Halstead went on to form another group called Mojave 3, which was one of the similar artists to Red House Painters, and that is a much more, I talked about this on the last time that we covered them, but I was familiar with them as well, and that was a group that they just did like acoustic stuff. It was like a folk kind of almost country music as well, so they were still collaborating together even beyond this. So that, but during this time of writing these songs and really struggling with all of that, I don't know, Halstead came up with some great stuff, and in retrospect I was reading some other reviews and stuff about him, and he's a lot of people love him as a songwriter now. He's kind of gotten this resurgence and stuff, and they definitely reformed, and just had an album out last year. So I'm curious as to see where they go in the future when we cover them later. But again, to kind of piggyback off of what John said, this is the type of sound. This is quote unquote rock music today, right? Indie rock music today.
Yeah.
It all sounds like this, at least in
right.
terms of the reverb, the echoey nature. It's not just Beach House. It's like so many, I turn on the radio now for like, for the indie rock stations at least, or rock stations, and you've got a very kind of similar aesthetic going on there. Even a band like the 1975, which is kind of more of a pop band, like more of a well-known band, they're aping stuff from this as well. Exactly. It's got
that
this is what
thing is a huge
it's a crisper. It's there's no more classic blues riffs that are happening, right? It's more of this type of stuff, and this is a band that helped bring that to they were just 20 years ahead of their time, and the press just hated them, unfortunately. But overall, this record, I agree with you, John. It's definitely more consistent. It's got much stronger parts to it. I think actually I listened to our last review just to like refresh my memory of what we talked about, and I had mentioned several times in that review about there's a synthy nature. Like I like the synths, and to clean that stack, there are no synths on either of these records. It's just the way that they're playing the guitar that actually has like a synthetic kind of like keyboard type quality to it, but nonetheless, I still like it very much, and I could this. I'm glad we got into them, and I'm excited to cover them again later on.
Nice.
Well, you have to wait like till 2017.
I know.
We'll get there eventually. Don't worry.
I know.
So
I know.
Good stuff. Well, any final thoughts, guys? Not so
I think
much.
so.
All right.
Every time I heard Slow Dive, I kept thinking Slow Ride. So I was like, Slow Dive.
You must have been disappointed because it did not sound like Fall Cat. So,